The little girl's sneaker squeaked on the marble floor of the lobby, and she stopped dead in front of the woman in the gray suit. "Ma'am," she said, staring at the hand wrapped around a coffee cup, "my dad has a ring like yours." The woman went still. Her knuckles whitened around the cup. Somewhere behind her, an elevator chimed, and nobody in that lobby understood why a billionaire had just stopped breathing over a 5-year-old sentence. Before you watch the full story, comment below. Which country are you watching from? And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story might be even bigger. 3 weeks earlier, nobody in that building knew her name. She wore a coat 2 sizes too big, carried a paper cup of gas station coffee, and signed in at the front desk as E. Voss, Temp, Facilities. The security guard barely looked up. "Cleaning crews through that door, sweetheart. Mop closets on the left," he said, already bored with her before she'd said a word. She smiled, said thank you, and disappeared down the service corridor like she'd done it 1,000 times. In her coat pocket was a wallet so worn the leather had gone soft as fabric, and inside it, behind an expired card, a photograph nobody had seen in 11 years. She hadn't planned on being here. Not like this. 10 years ago she had walked out of a boardroom 2 floors above, where she now pushed a cart of cleaning supplies, and she had signed away controlling shares in a company with her own name stitched into its very walls. She remembered the lawyer's pen scratching against paper, remembered thinking, "I am choosing my daughter over all of this," and not regretting it once. Not once in 10 years. Some doors, she had told herself back then quietly to no one. You only get to close once, so make sure you're closing them for the right person. She hadn't known, not really, how true that would turn out to be. The building was Voss Tower. Nobody who worked there anymore remembered a Voss had built it, let alone that a Voss now emptied the trash bins on the 9th floor. The new CEO, a sharp, impatient man named Callum Reyes, had inherited the seat through a merger and treated the founding family's name like a legal formality stamped on stationery. His assistant, a bright and skeptical young woman named Priya, once caught the temp lingering a beat too long in front of the old founder's portrait in the east hallway. "You always stare at that painting," Priya said. Not unkindly, just curious. The woman only nodded and kept mopping. Nobody thought anything of the ring she wore on a chain under her collar, tucked out of sight. A plain gold band scratched, engraved on the inside with initials nobody in that building would recognize. The first crack came quietly. A letter, forwarded 3 times, finally landed on the temp's kitchen table. An overdue notice for her daughter's school tuition, a small account she'd been draining slower than she wanted to admit. Then the crack widened. A phone call from her ex-husband's lawyer, informing her that her daughter's father, a man who had barely shown up in 6 years, was petitioning for full custody, citing her unstable income and unsuitable housing. Her hands shook so hard she dropped the phone twice trying to write down the court date. Then the crisis, spoken out loud in a fluorescent-lit hallway by a stranger in a cheap suit. "Ms. Voss, the hearing is in 9 days. If you can't demonstrate financial stability, the judge will likely rule against you." 9 days. She had 9 days to prove she could provide for the only thing she had never once regretted keeping. And underneath all of it sat the older, quieter choice, the one nobody knew about. Reveal who she really was, walk back into that boardroom and reclaim what was legally, unquestionably hers, or stay hidden, stay small, and risk losing her daughter to a man who'd once called their marriage a mistake he was still paying for. Stay with me here, because what happens next is the part nobody saw coming. Would you have given up everything to protect the ones you love, even if no one ever knew? Nobody believed her at first. Not the young paralegal at the courthouse who squinted at her intake form and asked twice if she meant to write Voss, or if that was a typo. Not the judge's clerk, who chuckled softly when she requested that her filing be cross-referenced with Tower corporate records. Not even Callum Reyes, who, when Priya finally pushed the strange rumor up the chain, laughed into his coffee and said, "The janitor thinks she's a Voss? That's the best thing I've heard all quarter." It took one signature, hers, on a probate document she'd filed away a decade ago and never destroyed, A signature that matched, stroke for stroke, the one carved into the tower's founding charter. Before anyone in that building stopped laughing, the ring came back into it there, in the notary's office, when she finally pulled the chain from beneath her collar and set it, gently, on the table beside the documents. "It was my father's," she said, voice steady even though her hands were not. "He gave it to me the day he signed the company over to me. I gave up the company. I never gave up the ring." The notary, a woman who'd seen 1,000 forged claims in her career, went quiet for a long moment, then reached for the phone. The days that followed moved slower than any of the 9 that came before them. Forensic accountants combed through a decade of blind trusts and dormant voting shares. A family court investigator cross-examined her landlord, her daughter's teacher, the diner where she picked up extra shifts on weekends. In the boardroom, lawyers used words like fiduciary reinstatement and irrevocable proxy and beneficial ownership, dense phrases that meant, in the end, one simple thing. The company had never stopped being hers, only asleep, waiting. Twice it nearly collapsed. Once, when a rival board member tried to argue the original charter had lapsed on a technicality. Once, when her ex-husband's lawyer used the custody filing itself as proof of instability against her reinstatement. In the middle of all that cold legal noise, Priya, the same assistant who'd once caught her staring at a painting, slipped her a cup of coffee during a recess and said quietly, "For what it's worth, I always thought you looked like him, in the portrait." It was such an ordinary, oddly specific thing to notice, the shape of a jaw in an old oil painting, and it was the first kindness anyone in that building had offered her in 3 weeks. The final hearing came down to a single decision: whether the court would recognize her reinstated ownership before the custody ruling was finalized. When the gavel came down in her favor, she didn't cheer. She put both hands flat on the table and just breathed, the way you breathe after holding something underwater for a very long time. Some doors, she had told herself once, quietly, to no one, you only get to close once, so make sure you're closing them for the right person. She understood now that she'd also get, if she was lucky, to open one again, for the same reason. The room exhaled with her. Someone's chair scraped back. Priya was the first to speak, whispering, "Oh my God," under her breath, hand pressed to her mouth. Callum Reyes, to his credit, crossed the room and offered his hand, saying only, "I owe you an apology I don't know how to phrase yet." The judge overseeing the custody matter, informed of the reinstatement by the time the second hearing opened, looked over her glasses and said, for the record, that few parents she'd seen in that courtroom had shown this level of quiet, sustained sacrifice for a child. Her daughter ran into the hallway before anyone could stop her, sneakers squeaking on marble, and wrapped both arms around her mother's waist. The ring, back around her neck, caught the hallway light for just a second. Months later, the mop closet on the 9th floor sat forgotten, a strange footnote in company lore. Voss Tower ran the way it always should have, with her name back on the door in small, unassuming letters she'd insisted on keeping modest. Her daughter, older now, sturdier, sat across from her one evening at the kitchen table doing homework, and glanced up at the ring on the chain around her mother's neck. "Are you ever going to wear it on your hand again?" she asked. Her mother looked at it for a long moment and said, "I think I finally can." It wasn't the company that had needed reclaiming, she realized, so much as the right to be seen, and she'd only been able to do that once she was sure it was for the right person, in the right order, all along. What would you have done in her place? If this story moved you, hit subscribe. There's a new one waiting for you tomorrow. Somewhere above the city, in an office with her father's old chair still behind the desk, a gold ring sat catching the last of the evening light on a woman's hand, finally still.